Harvard Ukrainian Summer Institute. Actually, today we're moving away from history, our relatively safe haven, to present day. And I'm happy to introduce our special guest today, Olga Yarmolenko. Is an associate professor at the Nord University Business School, Norway. And until yesterday has been a visiting scholar here at Weatherhead Center for International Affairs. Dr. Yarmolenko's interests include the management and performance evaluation of international projects with a societal impact, such as the retraining and social adaptation of veterans and internally displaced people in Ukraine, accounting changes in the context of traditional economies with a special focus on energy sector, accountability of charities and other organizations in Ukraine during the war. She's the author of numerous publications, and her most recent article is titled, Do We Hear the Voices of Local Citizens When We Arrange Cultural Mega Projects for Them? A case of the European Capitals of Culture, published last year, 2024, in CITES, the International Journal of Urban Policy and Planning. So please join me in welcoming Professor Yarmolenko.
Thank you so much for this introduction. As you have heard, I have diverse interests, research interests, and that's because we are all the time invited to join different projects. We also, as scholars, write our own projects to get grants, because in Norway, nothing is for free from the university. So even if you want to go to a conference, you always have to have a project that would cover that. The same as the research day or anything. So yeah, we try to attract a lot of funding. So that's why we do different research. However, today, as it was already mentioned, I will talk mostly about accountability and social media and the role of this accountability and social media engagement for charities in Ukraine during the war. However, let me introduce myself a little bit more, because you've heard a very brief introduction, but I think you're curious who I am, where I'm coming from, and just to make it clear from the very beginning, I can say that I was born in Donetsk region, and I grown up there, but I moved to Kyiv with my family, and I studied at Kyiv National University, and if you know this iconic building, so I belong to those students who graduated from there, and I'm sure there are a few people here who also studied at the same university. So I did my bachelor and master there, and then there was a program opened, like a cooperation with the Norwegian University on the top, Nord University, and I was the first master student that took part in the 2 years program, Master of Science in Business. And it has happened that I was invited to contribute to different projects on Ukraine with different actors like the Norwegian Ukrainian Chamber of Commerce. And after that, I started also doing my PhD. And I successfully defended my thesis in 2018, and it was about the accounting changes in the transitional economy. And although you may wonder, where is Budo actually? Nord University. So here is where Budo is. It's about the polar circle. So the winters are tough there, although beautiful, and the summers are really nice. So if you consider going to Norway one day, I recommend you doing that during the summer period. Yes, and since I came to Budo, we've had developed a lot of projects with different universities in Ukraine throughout, actually, and I've been to each center there with monitoring missions, because my background is in accounting, and as it was also mentioned, performance measurement and management of big projects. So, and the projects were funded by different agencies. And interestingly, Norway is a very, low power distance country. So we do a lot of meetings with policymakers, and here you can see, if you know those people, of course, but in the corner there, the former Prime Minister of Norway, Erna Solberg, who served the 2 terms, and I was gladly presenting the Guide to Doing Business in Ukraine and Guide to Doing Business in Norway. That was a part of our project with the Norwegian Ukrainian Chamber of Commerce, and more recent inputs on the Ukrainian policy and developments. We've had a roundtable with the current Norwegian Prime Minister, So although we are small, but we make impact, I hope. Yes, and that's it about me. I think now you know a little bit about me, and if you have questions later, we can take that. But today I will talk not about the history as it was mentioned, but something more contemporary. And the research on charities came actually from my, well, we all were donating some money once the full-scale war started. And then, of course, it was popular to donate to the charity fund of Pritula. And it was like obligation, you know, everybody was asking, did you donate? And then me and my student at that time, my PhD student, Valeria, we started thinking like, okay, we donated, but where the money went? What did they do with this money? And I think there were many people around, you know, wondering with the same. And at that point, Valeria was doing her PhD, and then we decided, okay, why not write one paper on, you know, charity in Ukraine and accountability, because we both are in accounting. So this cooperation also included Caroline Portery. She's a professor of non-profit organizations from New Zealand, and we together published a few papers then. And today's lecture will consist of a few parts. I will talk a little bit about the charitable activities and war, how the war affects charity activities, and also why do we need this digital accountability, the so-called crowd-based accountability, because of the digitalization and social media usage. And what's also interesting, you know, many people would argue, especially you who have a social science background, history, that accounting is boring. Like, I would totally disagree with you. Accounting is not boring. Accounting is much more fun, and accounting is much more than numbers. And the numbers, they produce reactions. And this is what we call the emotive power of accounts. And I hope that we will have an exercise that you will also learn why there is an emotive power of those accounts. And as it was mentioned, we use the Sergei Pritula Charity Fund as a case. So most of the examples that I will use during the lecture will be based on this. So what do we know about the philanthropy and May disasters? Of course, once something happens, disaster happens, we give a response. We have our own obligations. And this is what happened with the First World War, Second World War, and this is what happened also in Ukraine. We witnessed a very dramatic increase in charitable and philanthropic activities in Ukraine since 2014, when the war just started. But with the full scale, of course, many more people started being charitable and volunteers. And what's interesting that against all predictions, we still have quite good charitable donations in Ukraine that actually serve the military very well. And here are some trends. We see a dramatic increase of charitable engagement, shares of those who donate and volunteer. So every year it increases, and now it reaches the maximum point of 86%. And I think it's one of the highest numbers in the world now. So Ukraine is absolutely on the top of all other countries. And we see also percentage of donors in the society and volunteers. Number of volunteers, of course, increasing also dramatically, but not so much as donors. So we see that donors went from 53% to 73%, and also we have up to 43% of people who report that they engage in volunteering related to war. So despite physical, moral, and financial exhaustion, the civil society sector and the public continues to support each other, demonstrating a high level of engagement in charitable activities. However, the Ukrainian context is a little bit specific. You know, those who are familiar with, and now you learn a lot, there is not so much trust in between people sometimes. So people, those who donate, they usually like to donate to the volunteers they know. But there are also a lot of charitable organizations to which people have their trust. And Sergei Pritula Fund is also one of those funds, and I will talk about it later. And if you are curious, the average monthly donation by person is about $20, and $120 in 3 months. And there is a slight difference between individuals and benefactors who do that, and also some other businesses, for example. But most of donations come from private people, and those donations are normally around $10, $20 per time. And here we see some map of different charities, and as we see, Sergei Prytula Charity Foundation is one of the most sort of known in Ukraine, and especially in the beginning of the war, of course, people knew another one, Come Back Alive. That's also a very reputable organization in Ukraine. And I would even say that they have a much more sophisticated accounting and accountability system. But for us as researchers was very interesting to see how the accountability of the charity fund of Prytula evolved through the time, from the first time when we just questioned, where is the money? And then what happened with this money? So yes, there are also other known organizations, but they are not a part of the current study. But what's so special with the Ukrainian charities, maintaining so high level of private donations? Like, I bet that there is no other country in the world that is doing so good as Ukraine doing right now, especially those charitable organizations. And they make a lot of different, innovations in terms of management or in terms of accounting and accountability to make it work. So the first part is about the crowd-based accountability. And for those of you who are not in accounting, I need to, start with explaining some basic things. And what's accountability? How do we make ourselves accountable? If we are, welcome. No worries, welcome. By the way, I didn't manage. If you have any questions, I think we can take it, or we take it after. How do we do it? Okay, so I finished on the, yeah, okay, good. So accountability. What is being accountable? It's, when you take responsibility for some actions and you report on what you did, what you didn't do, why didn't you do it. So if we call it in a very simple term, what is a crowd-based accountability? Crowd-based is when you have a lot of, for example, donors that are coming from social media. So there are millions of different people, and you still have to provide some sort of accountability that would produce some trust so that they still donate to your charity. And why it's important, the number of individuals that are using internet is really increasing. And we have approached now 5.5 billion people, users of internet, and those who use social media, it's just crazy. So accountability is an obligation or willingness to accept responsibility or to account for one's actions. And here the central questions are, to whom, what purpose, whose benefit, and which means, and with what consequences. And usually we have different parties that are interested in different types of accountabilities, and that's why we call it upward accountability, where we have donors, government, or funders that demand accountability. And here we have typically annual reports that actually provide a picture of how business or charity organization is doing. Then we have sideways accountability, like, for example, other nonprofit organizations, because charities often cooperate with each other, supply different things, or they help each other. This is how this sector works. Also, inwards accountability, where we have board of their directors or the staff that also needs to have an overview what's going on in the company. And then there are different types of internal documents that provide that sort of accountability for this inward people. And then downwards accountability, and this is the most important and interesting for me in this research, it's about the beneficiaries. those who donate money. And here, this is important, this crowd-based accountability, because also we see a lot of increase in the usage of social media, as it was, mentioned. But what's interesting, in many much research published about, social media and usage of social media for accounting and accountability, it's usually a very one-sided story. So that the company or a charity publishes something and then never replies. So it stays unanswered. So they sort of make themselves accountable on social media, but they don't really take the responsibility of what they do. So that's why it was interesting to see how it is actually happening in Ukraine. To be on the same page again, for those who are not accountants, I just introduced these terms one more time. I hope I have time for that. Anyway, accountability is an obligation to answer for actions, and where we have, and here it may be very specific to specific groups, but crowd-based accountability is often accountability pressures that come from demands of different stakeholders, which is less clear and unspecified. And this is the pseudonymous social media crowd that actually asks for many different things. And actually, the crowd-based accountability term came from the TripAdvisor studies, where you have a lot of different people coming to different hotels, and then they all have different requests. Somebody needs better meal, somebody needs better service. So that's why this crowd-based accountability, how organizations, they make themselves accountable for those people. So it's basically the same with the charity organizations. And with some later examples, I will tell you why and how. But the basic thing of accountability is disclosure. It's the act of revealing information to others about one's actions, decisions, and performance. In the context of crowd-based accountability, it should be very transparent, it should be democratic, easy accessible, and it also needs to have a dialogue in between the crowd and the organization. However, there is a very big question of the capacity of crowd-based accountability dialogue and how it unfolds. So this is basically what we try to do in one of the papers. And looked at different disclosures made by the fund. And of course, there might be different types of disclosures. You may also guess financial, performance measures, social performance disclosures, etc., etc. We see that in Ukraine, now I think there is even more people, but around 27 million Ukrainians use social media. And with the beginning of the war, everybody was stuck in on social media, checking Instagram for news or Telegram or different channels. So 74% of Ukraine's total adult population had access to social media and were influenced by social media at that time. And here about the case. For those who don't know Serhiy Prytula, he is a Ukrainian public and political figure. He started as a comedian. We in Ukraine, we love comedians. One is the president, another one is his rival. Anyway, I don't know what are his chances if he goes for the presidency, but maybe you tell me later. Anyway, he's still a very influential and popular person in Ukraine. He actually established his fund way before the full-scale invasion. And they were serving underprivileged kids, delivering some things to people in need. So he was also working for the needs of the army, but not to that extent as they do now. And the study is based on ethnography. So me and my colleagues, we studied the social media platforms, Instagram, Facebook, and YouTube to see how this accountability dialogue was unfolding in the case of this fund. And of course, we also had semi-structured interviews with the fund employees and some external experts from one expert NGO that has a very good overview of the charity sector in Ukraine. So yes, in just 1 year since the full-scale invasion, the fund managed to gather approximately 115 million USD. And most of these donations came via social media. So almost, I don't remember exact number, but around 90% came from, social media, actually 85%. Yes, 85% of its donations were collected through the internet. And only 15% came from other donors like companies, Ukrainian companies. And what's interesting, on average, each donation was around $17. So you see the volume of how many people and how repeatedly they were donating. So that means that the fund did something, unique in a way to stimulate these donations. Yeah, it was the fund was very fortunate to have such a popular owner who could actually spread information, communicate, and gain trust. So at the time when we made our study, so we saw that Sergei Prytula had 2 million subscribers on his Instagram, while his charity fund had a little bit less than 40,000 people. Subscribers. And what we did in terms of methodology, if somebody wonders, we analyzed each post of the charity foundation, and then we also saw some reposts from Sergei Prytula social media, also his YouTube channel, and therefore we were able to reconstruct the events that were unfolding on social media. So this is something very confusing at the first glance. I'm so sorry. But if you look at it, the way how we saw these problematics. So first, we, as also donors, we were concerned what's going on with the fund. And we couldn't see any information anywhere because even social media platforms were not established for the fund right after the full-scale invasion. So Prytula started collecting money for something, and we never knew what's going on. So I think you all remember that situation. And somewhere in April, I guess, after a few months after the full-scale invasion, they actually created their social media official pages where they started supplying some sort of information. And of course, questions from the public came: where are the purchases of the fund? And then the fund understood that if they don't answer in any ways, then they will lose this dialogue. So they started doing something. And Prytula started with the live streams and then with the interviews published on YouTube. First interview was about how to receive help for beneficiaries, because it was one of the most asked questions, especially in private messages, because there were many people going to the military, volunteers, etc., having a lot of troubles finding equipment, and then they didn't know how Prytula Fund could help them. So that's why they published this video as the first one. And then of course there were a lot of big words like Prytula is Shahra, like Prytula, he is cheating, and etc., etc. And then they issued a video that was about why volunteer activity is not self-serving, where Prytula was explaining that this money he collects, it doesn't go to him to please him and his family, but it actually goes to the front line. And in this way, we call this period of chaotic accountability and no dialogue. And here you will see why. These are the first posts from the Instagram page, and this is the reporting, all the reporting you could find on the fund activities in the very beginning, when the fund started, creating some sort of narrative, accountability, and you couldn't understand where it is delivered, who benefits from that, where the money came from. So once they started reporting, it was positive. So people liked it, that they do something, but at the same time, people started asking new questions. And here, as we call it, second period and changes in accountability, where we have the dialogue that unfolds. So there were different activities, and you may remember there were plenty of different campaigns, but three major ones is about People's Bayraktar, about the, my God, armored, no, how do you call it, UAV, aerial vehicles that are unmanned. Yes, unmanned aerial vehicles. Yes, that were eventually, as we knew after a while, were provided to Ukraine for free. And then this also created very, very big reaction on the social media asking, okay, we donated a lot of money. It was a lot of money. And where are the Bayraktars? And what did you do with the money that were left? Because you didn't purchase them, you got them for free. So all this dialogue was unfolding, and there were a lot of repeated questions like where the purchases of the fund, where the money going, sharing, spending, do beneficiaries receive help? Many questions. Where are the reports? And at that time, they didn't have the reports like in normal form. They had just some social media posts, but if you looked at the website or anything, you couldn't find anything. So, and there were a lot of questions under the YouTube videos, like Mr. Benefactor, like Pritula, he takes 20% of donations to himself. And Mr. Benefactor will take all fame about stealing the money, about, you know, everything. And then, of course, the fund started thinking what to do, how to report, how to gain trust. So their reporting started being much more organized. You know, if you look at this, the first pictures, and we see what's going on here. So we see how much money they collected, what they purchased, but at the same time, there were a lot of questions how those are delivered, who are benefited. So they started making new videos, answering those questions. And in this way, this dialogue really unfolded. And it seemed like the fund heard the people, and the people were really listening, reflecting, and being critical. And yeah, so, and it was also very special because after this campaign with the People's Bayraktars, there was a question where the money is, and fund couldn't disclose the information. So they were also stuck in a way because we couldn't say that, oh, we purchased a satellite that is helping our military to actually survive on the front line. So there were some limitations, and we witnessed that sometimes they want to disclose the information, but it's not always possible. At least they need to wait up to certain points in time when they can disclose more information. So then we all knew, okay, Pritula bought a satellite, but where it is? And there were a lot of questions, like, and you can't just post the, you know, the picture of the satellite, and people will know, okay, that's actually what our money went to. So yeah, you know, this situation was very interesting, and you know, they had to make a lot of explanations also on social media using the videos on YouTube. And at that time, like many people were still stuck on YouTube, you know, relying on all that information. And yeah, so we went to this sort of accountability, but it's not the end. They were still improving. And this is what we call the third period, period of new accountability, where the dialogue continued and everything started being much more organized. Even if you went to the webpage at that point, you would find very good reports with visualizations, with statistics, with you know, financial reports, how much, what they, of course, without details, who are the suppliers or something that, so the information they couldn't disclose, but at least they started disclosing the information that they could. But still, people had a lot of different questions, reports, etc. Where are the reports? So then the official website was updated, reporting was added, and then they started, you know, producing those visual reports annually, quarterly, etc., etc. So that means that they were thinking and seeing that this accountability is really important in this case. Yes, so the major takeaways from this first study, if I may. We witness this change in continuous accountability process of ongoing accountability dialogues, and we see that it was crucial to, you know, to maintain that trust with the, or maybe, well, the game of trust with the beneficiaries, with those people who donate, with this pseudonymous crowd, as we call it. And what's also interesting that we see that this social media dialogue starts with disclosures. Once you disclose some information, you get questions in return, and you should be prepared to answer them. So this social media engagement creates unending dialogue, hence the fund makes daily disclosures. What we see, what we witnessed, at least during this 1 year of, chaos and a lot of uncertainty, that this charity fund, they actually managed to reconfigure this chaotic accountability and no dialogue to this new type of accountability, and developed ongoing dialogue with the crowd. And what we witness also, maybe it's more important for accountants like us who study, accountability of charities. Anyway, we see that the circumstances of war impose certain limitations on charities' disclosures because they don't disclose everything they want. So they must withhold some information from the public that also kind of creates space for questioning and for criticism. And when we were talking also to the employees of the fund, we often heard from them that they are very frequently attacked by bot farms and this fake news, and some pages were stolen. And then, so this was a real risk in the beginning, and they needed to invest a lot in IT protection to actually stay safe. And the platforms that delivered money to the fund, that they were also functioning safely. But what we also see that the celebrity founder plays a crucial role in communicating with the crowd. And this is something we kind of contribute with to the theory yeah. So that was the first part, how Ukrainian charities actually managed to get a lot of money by building this accountability dialogue. But there are other issues to that, of course. There are other building blocks. And it didn't come to the first paper, but we always had in the backside of our heads, no, there was a lot of emotions involved. And we will play a game maybe with you a little bit about the emotions, about detecting emotions if we have time. But anyway, let's start with some basic definitions as usually. Accounts or accounting and emotions. And it's often perceived that accounting or accounts, they are rational, emotionless, and they are not. And recent studies, they highlight the importance of recognizing the emotive power of accounting. And this is something I already mentioned, and I hope I will convince you after a while. So accounting plays a decisive role in presenting the information of the organization, and particularly enabling users to identify mistakes, failures, and also reinforce their emotional states. For example, when we report on super profits, we bring maybe positive emotions because we can do a lot of stuff. But when there are losses, errors, or something, so this produces negative emotions. Quite simple, right? So, and we also witness this unique situation with the Ukrainian charity. And actually, that's a very unique situation. Charity supplying weapons to the front line, taking financing from the crowds. So that has never happened before. That can happen only in Ukraine. So we must study this, of course. However, the theme of emotions in the accounting literature is not new. And generally, emotions are, you all know, they might be positive or negative. And then among positive, we have joy-based emotions like appreciation, comfort, elation, happiness, joy, pride, empathy. And then we have a very big spectrum of negative emotions, fear-based emotions, anger-based emotions, sadness-based emotions. Among them are anxiety, discomfort, fear, worry, anger, animosity, annoyance, frustration, irritation, guilt, regret, and shame. So this is what's reported in the accounting literature. So when we started working with the disclosures of the fund, we started also assessing those posts, and I will show you which posts on what kind of emotion they produce to understand, to construct the picture, what helps this charity fund to attract money, and how do they do that. So social media is really used by charities now, and also, as it was mentioned before, with some visual artifacts and when you have different stakeholders, celebrity owner, like the Sergei Prytula Fund, and then they use it actively for making this sort of communication. And there is, of course, study of what kind of emotions Ukrainians often have when they donate to charities, and the most sort of reported, the most popular emotion is hope. Like we all hope that the world will end, and people hope that their donation makes a difference actually. And then there were other types of emotions, but this is something general. And then we wanted to look specifically at the posts of Sergei Prytula Fund to actually detect what kind of emotions do they produce. And we use the same campaigns we used before. So the first one is about Bayraktars. And we structured it in a way that we had, the announcement, the first account, the midway account, and the final account. And I guess I will ask you all to reflect a little bit what kind of emotions you detect here. First, second, third. Yeah, let's try, because there are different emotions. And then I have one, table with sorting out. And we did it actually first manually, but then also with the help of IT tools, like with artificial intelligence detecting and proving us if we are right or not. And then had some conversations with the psychologists of the department. So also looking at, different pictures and these accounts and what kind of emotions they produce. So the first one, Prytula collect donations to buy 3 Bayraktars. Every 20 hryvnias, that was $0.50, are important. That was the message thrown. And this message was thrown on the birthday of Sergei Prytula. So they were specifically targeting people, his fans, to congratulate him with his birthday. And they gave just 1-2 days for this campaign to actually collect millions of dollars. And it was very successful. I remember that date when everybody was reposting stories on social media. Have you donated? Have you sent money to Prytula to congratulate him with his birthday? So, okay, what kind of emotions does first one produce for you? Any guesses? Joy-based, anger-based?
Joy-based.
Yes, of course. Then we have joy-based. So that's joy, happiness, elation, hope, and faith. So this is what we saw. Patriotism in a way, pride. And here, at least at the first picture, we don't see anything negative. It's a birthday, it's a gift. So here we have the emotions that actually spread across, and we get a lot of money. So then in order to remind people about, that the campaign continues, they use something else. There is quite a bit left, stimulating people to donate more so that actually they reach their goal. And the final account, that was also hilarious. The first one is not super close because they wanted to buy 3, but they actually collected money to buy 4. So, and and incredible Ukrainians exceeded the plan for Bayraktar. So this was the message of the final account. But let's see if we have positive or negative emotions in the second one. What's it for you?
Positive.
Yes, right. Second one is totally positive. And then we sort of start having something else at the background. So at the final account, we finally see some negative emotions as well. But also that's, in some sense for the Ukrainians, it's black humor that we count as the positive emotion. But at the same time, we have this animosity. Did I pronounce it correctly? I'm so sorry for those who are natives here. Anyway, so here we start witnessing some sort of mixed emotions that actually help to, produce some new reactions. So that the fund is clearly aware of that. And they actually mentioned that yeah, we know how to do that. We know what works with the people. Anyway, that was the first example. This is the second one. And this was, revenge campaign when we had a very big attack on Kiev. I think you remember this first infrastructure, very, very strong. And here you made Ukrainians angry. So here we see that the announcement doesn't really have any positive emotions. So it starts just with, total animosity and anger. And then we move to Ukrainians are angry for more than this amount of money. So here we again have the sort of black humor, of course, and then we have some positive emotions as well, like we are, we have hope and faith that we will change something. And then the final account was about Ukrainians were angry for, the final account. So here we also witness a mix of positive and negative emotions and how it worked out in this case. And then the third example we use here is about, buying Spartans. Maybe you also remember that story when they were gathering for 50 Spartans. And that's also because Prytula Fund somehow found the suppliers who could do that, who could supply these vehicles. And that was a very, very rare chance at that time. And Prytula was saying, we have it, we must take it now. And then the midway account was, we have gathered donations for 25, but we must buy them all 50. And what was interesting, that the final account doesn't contain any explanation. It doesn't contain any letters. It just crosses 5 and adds 6. So that means they collected for 16. And here, of course, you may see now the total picture of what we found at different accounts of different campaigns. So, it's a total mix of different kind of emotions. But what's also interesting, the positive emotions, they prevail. We have much more positive emotions. So it's interesting that Ukrainians and the charities, they sort of know how people perceive the information, how they want to see the information. So besides this black humor, etc., they still want to produce a narrative of being, positive, that, yeah, we can beat the enemy, etc., etc. So I see the time is almost up, so I'm wrapping up. I'm trying to be quick, and I'm sorry if I talk too quick. Anyway, what we witnessed, what we understood from this study, that the fund created campaigns to particularly important events. Like first, there was a birthday of Prytula. In the second time, they had, the attack on Kiev. Everybody was angry. Even the name of the campaign was Revenge. Like it was very laden at that point of time. And the third one was when they knew that there are valuable supplies to the militaries and we must take it. So, they could convince people to donate more money. And then we see that the fund used these different emotional contexts for their campaigns and played with these joy-based, anger-based emotions. And, we looked at different sets of emotions, but we now can, based on the Ukrainian context, add patriotism, hope, faith, and humor, which is often the black humor, but this is how Ukrainians live. And surprisingly, there was little focus on fear because often sadness-based emotions and fear are those that are used by most of the charities, when they picture the kids in Africa starving, and this is what they want. But in the Ukrainian case, the approach is much more complex. Yes, and what's also interesting and special about our case with Ukraine, that Ukrainians are cast as both donors and beneficiaries because their donations contribute to their security and ability to stay and live in the country. So you are not in a position that you donate money to kids that are starving in Africa, but you are actually investing in your own security. So this is a very unique case again. And it's also very interesting in terms of this accountability literature, how the fund utilized the system of this life cycle of the accounts where they had initial, midway, final accounts to actually, stimulate the donations. And of course, the charisma of the celebrity within the fund at that point of time was very, very, important. So thank you for your attention. And brain right now, but very safe and.
Thank you, Olga, for wonderful presentation, for showing us that numbers are not boring, but even emotional, and hopefully we gonna have not boring, emotional, intellectual discussion.
Okay, let's try.
And yeah, with the questions, emotional, intellectual, event, please.
Thank you. I have thousands of questions, but
Start.
I'll limit myself. Yes, just a quick one to understand. When did you conduct the semi-structured interview? What was like when did you start doing that? It's
It
not
was-
a substantial question, just to understand.
In the end of 2022, beginning of 2023.
I see. All right. Yeah. And so then my question is about the value of what's described, and did you mention a lot about the the armored vehicles and other sort of double, maybe even like double gold items that they are collecting, which are normally charity foundations are not collecting. So then the question is for what is the role of that aspect in the communication of Prytula Foundation that you can see? So how, in other words, do you see them communicating that they are buying weapons essentially? And how do you see it like being in line with communication of other entities like Come Back Alive, who've been there since 2014? And lastly, like within this emotive power of the accounts, how would you situate their videos of FPV drones like hitting the targets? In because I've checked they do that, so maybe not on Instagram but on Telegram at least, and Twitter. So yeah, these three questions: the communicating that this is the double the double gold items, then the question of and then the question of basically of communication, comparison to others, and like communicating through action.
I haven't published anything on the comparison with other funds, but of course we looked at, and also when the war started, like we were donating like at least to those biggest ones, Come Back Alive and then Prytula Charity Foundation. And then we were amazed how the Come Back Alive reporting system was done, because you saw even the 4 last digits of your credit card, and then you could trace where the money went. So their system of, accountability, that's the top of the top in the world. And that's something we want to study as our next point. But at this point of time, we didn't really have the comparison. We conducted some interviews preliminary, and we kind of start understanding. But you also mentioned that they established their charity in 2014. So they've had quite a time, 8 years before the full-scale war came. They were ready in a way, but Prytula Charity Foundation, they were not ready. And communication is done by different channels, and you are absolutely right. They use so many different platforms, but they duplicate the information on each one. So it's still the same point, the same disclosure they make on their social media. And then about those, when they hit the targets, etc., we didn't study specifically those videos because we were more, we are aware of them, and they are all, each video is in one spreadsheet where we have, each post, each video with the comment and analysis and how it impacts the dialogue. But we didn't really study because we focused on those 3 major campaigns, because, in each research you have a limitation. You always have to acknowledge some of your limitations. You can't do everything. You can't grasp everything. So that was the limitation of our study at that time.
Jordan?
First.
I have a question regarding if there are any similar studies about Russian fundraisers, because I think that it would be really interesting to compare Russian fundraising system, amount of money raised and Ukrainian, because I think from this point of view, I think that the Ukrainian fundraisers are working much better than Russian ones, and there will be much more money collected by Ukrainian fundraisers than Russian.
The
So it's an-
context is different, the need is different, and I unfortunately didn't do any study by myself, but I'm sure there are some studies done by some other researchers, so that unfortunately I'm not able to say much. I do some other research on the geopolitical tensions, but that's completely out of the scope of the charity focus. So I am unfortunately not able to answer something solid here.
Yeah, thank you, Olga. I had a question. Well, I know you focus on, let's say, more formal donations, but we know also that there is a lot of informal donations in Ukraine. And I was wondering if you had an idea of the balance between formal and informal, and if you had noticed an evolution since the beginning, like since 2014. So, like, is there like a institutionalization sort of donations or not?
Yes, it's a very fair question, very good question. And you know, they also have a lot of reports on kids donating or pensioners donating, or some people from abroad who are doing some paintings and then they sell them. And that's also a part of this informal, you know, mechanism, and it's also evolving. So they report on that as well. So we have some information on that. But again, for the focus of the study, we selected only those 3 major campaigns, you know, with millions of dollars, and rather focused on those and the specifics of those then. But you are absolutely right. There are different in-kind donations, and there are different charities cooperating, you know, when someone has their armored vehicles or then other cars, something which is necessary, or equipment or medicines or anything, they all cooperate. So this is something also special about the Ukrainian context nowadays, and it's worth studying.
Yeah. Thank you for the lecture. I was thinking like with the criticism I would hear sometimes is that the donations are basically compensating where the state is failing and for objective reasons, like not enough funding from abroad. But maybe could you talk a bit about that, and also like what's the relationship between this donation, like both formal and informal, and the macroeconomics of Ukraine? Because I understand like 100 million, it's a great amount of money, and I'm sure on an individual level it helped like a whole lot of soldiers who actually needed it and saved a lot of lives. But on the other hand, like the scale of that, like the EU scheme would amount to like 50 billion
Of course.
euros. So I just wondered that, and if I may just very briefly also, I know this might not be of your interest or not of the interest of your research, but does it at certain point become a political tool? Because I've also noticed that in your in the chart you've had in the presentation attached with the foundations of Mr. Akhmatov, Pinchuk, Prytula, and like, does this also become a certain tool of influence then? And how to deal with these tensions? At one point it saves lives, but at the same time it also might become, well, inevitably political, I believe.
Yeah. It's a very fair comment. Thank you very much for the question. And we thought about that as well, you know, because at some point Prytula was also, you know, visiting different countries with a lot of public appeals, etc., etc. So clearly he was using that for his own advance, for his own popularity, for his own, you know, probably political career ambitions in the future. So there is always, you know, a balance between what they do, but you know, still, you know, what comes to Ukraine, what's spent on the Ukrainian military, it's always good. So that was also one of the conversations I had last semester with one Finnish scholar here. She says, when I recommend someone to, you know, donate something to Ukraine, I say donate it to the Ukrainian charity. It will still stay in Ukrainian context, don't donate to something abroad, because then you never know whether it comes there. So any dollar that comes to Ukraine will be spent there in any way. So but we can be critical, because we study accountability and something which is disclosed. There is always something informal. There is something what's going on that we can't really access and understand. So we can still be critical, but at the same time, we must be positive, because if we are not positive, we will not win this war. So this is the approach we also had in our research.
Grant, please.
I have a question about if there is any official reporting. So what we were talking about is accountability to the public, which is great to have. And I was wondering if there is a push, I know it's very hard right now, to formalize or standardize reporting in Ukraine from the government side, or the
Mhm.
charities, because there have been a lot of charities, and just wonder how that works.
For now, the official reporting is done only to the tax authorities. They don't have any other sort of, like in Australia or New Zealand. It's much more established when you
Yeah.
have this charity organization, or in the US, and the way how they report. It's not yet there in Ukraine, but we are moving towards. They're looking at the best practices, and I'm sure that in the near future we will have some. Yeah, so this is something, it's a very fair question. This is something we started our research with, how to find something publicly available, or something where we could, request the information. Nothing, because according to the Ukrainian legislation, they were, or they are still obliged to report only to the tax authorities. No other information should be disclosed as a consequence of some laws. So everything they do is basically voluntarily. Every report they publish is just because of their own willingness to be transparent, not because the government actually tells them to do that.
Take a question from the online audience. And the question is from Boris Babin. Thanks for the fascinating presentation. And the question basically about charities and aiding internally displaced persons in Ukraine, either from Crimea or from newly occupied territories. So any links?
There are plenty of charities helping, but that's a little bit out of the scope of this research. So unfortunately, can't really. I work on another project that is about retraining of internally displaced people in different regions in Ukraine, but that's totally different story.
Thank you so much for your presentation. I have a quick question. Might seem a little bit outside of the scope of what you were talking about, but the three cases that you presented, they were very, very emotionally charged. One with the birthday, the other one with the mass shelling of Kyiv, and the one with the Stelink as well. Do you think maybe in the future research, do you think that having these rounds of fundraising that are charged because of something negative that happened, they in a way hurting the culture of donation in Ukraine, because you're almost dependent on those events to happen? Like these last few weeks, we've seen Kyiv being bombarded massively, and then through all the charitable organizations like Poverny Живемо, like Come Back Alive, or Ternenko or Prituла, the donations are going out, but that on the long run would decrease the donation if people only depend on those heavy emotional events, like we have with other stand-up comedian in Ukraine. They do all the I mean, when they're trying to sell something I don't know, Vasil Baydak trying to sell a knot of some tree, or some very simple things. Do you think that building this culture based on emotion on the long run will hurt the culture of fundraising?
No, I think the charities in Ukraine are so creative, so they will still find something to actually drag people's attention, exactly as you say, some nut or anything, and it drags attention, and they know how to use it. I think this is something unique that we have to report to the actually international wider public, because that's not happening in any other country in the world. So Ukrainians are really creative, and I think they will use the emotions. Of course, people are about the emotions. We will not be emotionless. So they will still use their emotions to actually achieve their goals, but they will do it in a variety of ways. And you saw that table, you know. So I think they will still use it.
Thank you very much for the presentation. I found it very interesting. I have 100 questions to choose from, but I found one. And even if asking it, it may transcend the scope of today's presentation, so I'm sorry in advance. In your research or in your studies, have you ever come across any charities or any organizations that have a lack of disclosure or a lack of accountability or foster any form of public distrust?
Mhm. Well, they all try to build, you know, this trust, but even the charity fund of Pritula, the first half a year after the full scale, it was just a chaos. It was so, like, you saw their accountability. There was nothing at all that could provide a solid picture of what was going on. So I suspect there are other charities that actually have some similar problems. But you know, when you depend on those crowd-based donations, then you have to appeal to that each crowd to collect money from them. So I think charities nowadays, they try to be very present on social media and to construct the dialogue there. So I don't do research on all charity organizations in the world, obviously, but I think the Ukrainian charities, they all are doing pretty well at this point of time.
One question from my audience, and I'll be back to physical audience. From Steph Kalitvin from Edmonton. Thank you for thought-provoking presentation. How can we as donors hold charities and charitable organizations accountable? What action can individuals do, actually?
Yeah, you can just
Okay.
engage in there. Thank you for the question. Engage in dialogues, ask questions and see whether they actually respond to you. And I think this is something, when you engage into those conversations, this is the only way, in a way. So, yeah.
Hi, my name is Hadi. I'm an international student from Iran at Yale, and I want to thank you for your lecture. It was really interesting. I want to ask about a trend that I personally noticed on social media of Ukrainians doing fundraisers for their birthdays and also promoting fundraisers for their friends' birthdays. And I wanted to know your opinion because when there are informal, personal fundraising is happening, it doesn't have a political agenda, obviously, because it's a person, it doesn't represent anything else. And also because the person already has an established trust with their audience and their following, it's easier to have that sort of crowd-based accountability. And it's easier to have the dialogue with them because if they don't have 2 million followers, it's just easier to, you know, communicate with them and ask about how the donation is going or like where the money's going. Do you think are these individual donations things that are there any plans to facilitate the process of these individual donations? And or are there any obstacles that might not make these look like a better option compared to traditional charities? Or what was your opinion?
No, that's about the influence of those, you know, influencers on social media. And you give money, obviously, to people you like. You don't give money to people you don't like. So you have to make people like you, and then you will get the donations. I think it's simple in a way. I mean, it's not simple to make 2 million people like you, but once you have that audience and they like you, then it's really difficult to, not difficult to ask them to make the donations because they like you and they feel like, oh yeah, why not? So, yeah.
So you think a larger audience is better in this case versus like many smaller?
The larger audience is always better. You know, there is some sort of, we call it social approval trend. And when you are in a certain community, so we all try to do same things to actually fit, and we get this social approval. That was also the case with Monobank in Ukraine, those of you who use it, you know, it's a neobank, and they created this system when you invite each friend, everyone, and this is how they make this, you know, circle of people who use the same thing, who do the same thing, and it's very convenient. And it's the same with, you know, any social media platform. And you talk about, so you have your conversations, you have those influencers. So yeah, I think it's better when you have, you know, this is the whole idea with this crowd-based, when you have very small transactions, but they are very frequent. And then instead of getting like $100 from 100 people, you get $10, $20 from millions of people. And then, of course, you have this effect. But that's my opinion. I might be wrong.
And then you.
So thank you very much for providing a picture of Ukrainian civil society, a strong aspect, nation building since 1991. On the other hand, another aspect that of political parties and coalitions with a strong institutional foundation and the capacity to advocate political programs and platforms has been lacking and had an ad hoc nature, with new parties being formed virtually after every election. Can one expect that the strong civil society at some point will be able to reverse and supplement this lacking aspect, this gap, which I mentioned?
Amazing question, you know. I can only speculate, but civil society in Ukraine is growing and getting more power. And what we see with Orange Revolution, with different events, like people have the power in a way, but we still have those oligarchs who also have so much power. And there it's really tricky to say something, you know. My prediction, it will take some years, but I'm really hopeful. I'm more on the side of those positive based emotions that the civil society will win in the end. But that's my hope. I try to be positive, but there are many realists, many, you know, people who are less pessimistic than me who would give another prognosis. So that question is really tricky, and I hope we can reflect on that after the war ends. We rebuild the institutions, we rebuild Ukraine as quickly as possible. So I am very hope, but I will keep it in my mind also, you know, to reflect on that after a few years. Thank you.
Thank you for being here, and thank you for approaching the accounting profession with an abundance of joy. So you have the circle of people who donated, and then you have the circle of people who asked questions. How much overlap was there, or do we have any sense of that? How many people who asked questions actually donated?
That's a very interesting question, because you never know if those people who ask questions, if they actually donated.
Right.
So you can never say, but you expect, I mean, those people being engaged and asking, where is my money? That means that they have donated and they have the interest. You know, once they engage and ask questions, that mean that they are somehow engaged in some ways, but there is no way, absolute no way to trace each individual on social media, whether they are donating or no. That's absolutely, we don't have the access to the, you know, accounts, all those spreadsheets with the operations. So, but we were thinking about it. It's always interesting to see whether actually those people who donate money ask questions, or whether those are people who don't donate, but they still ask questions. But we cannot know for sure.
One more question from online audience and from Raymond Aaron. Does the US or EU have any role in vetting Ukrainian charities or the citizens who might want to contribute?
Of course, you can always donate from any country, and
But did they check Ukrainian, I think vetting, yes, checking Ukrainian charities? Is there a way to, I guess, to
I'm not sure I understand the question.
Like checking the legitimacy.
legitimacy, yes, again, but checking the legitimacy of Ukrainian charities.
Charities. Well, there is a register of Ukrainian charities, so each charity has its number, and they are registered in the tax offices, etc. So of course, yes, but you know, if you want to donate, I would always recommend those biggest charities, or unless you have, you know, someone. So yeah, so this is my
Probably a question related from Sofia Kacher about the Ukrainian legislation regarding the charities. I mean, does it exist and how does it regulate?
Yeah, it exists, but I said it's limited. So charities are still free to do what they want to do as long as they report to the authorities, but they don't have such sophisticated system of reporting as the United States or Australia. So this is a way to go.
Sure, please.
I was wondering if there have been any trends of Ukrainian and Ukrainian-based charity organizations trying to reach out more globally. So like, aside from making posts in Ukrainian, has there also been maybe a trend of them making posts in other languages, for example, English?
Yeah, we studied that question. Thank you very much. Actually, we looked at the donations, total donations made. And what we see is that 90% of donations, they roughly 80% from Ukrainians in Ukraine. And then we have 15% of Ukrainians outside of Ukraine, and then the 5% roughly coming from foreigners, those who are influenced in some ways, you know, somebody knows some Ukrainians worked with Ukraine. So people who donate, they usually have some ties to Ukraine. And then, of course, you can post things, but you know, an Italian in Sicily who doesn't hear about the war, they don't really see that, don't really care. Only those people who are already attached to the conflict, then they donate. So this is the picture that we have nowadays. Well, there are so many disasters, so many made disasters in different parts of the world. So naturally, everybody is sort of, you know, attached to the local context and tries to contribute in all possible ways. But yeah, thank you for the question.
Thank you so much for your talk and getting a glimpse into something that I think oftentimes, like, a lot of people really have a question of where's the money going. And I'm really interested by this notion of emotion and also the tension between the collective audience and also the individual responsibility that sort of hit directly from the imaging and messaging post. And I'm curious if in any of the posts that you analyzed, there were instances where the goal fundraiser wasn't reached and how that's communicated, if that's communicated, what that also does to the relationship that's being built between the audience who is, you know, hoping for and expecting this positive result, and what happens if that hope is sort of shot down. Is that communicated? How do the comments change in that case? And if there's any sort of like discourse analysis around the types of commenting that happens, because I think the platform also becomes a way of checking up on one another. Not only are we keeping the charity itself accountable, but also each other. So there's a number of questions buried in
Yeah,
there,
a
but-
number of questions
Sorry.
in one, but just to keep it simple, we studied those three major campaigns, and they are the most successful campaigns of the fund. So there is no failure as such to study there. They were brilliantly managed in a way to attract the donations, and they were simple, you know, many of those pictures, they just give you don't need even to read. So in that way, there might be some, you know, unsuccessful stories, but I personally didn't study them to reflect in that way. And it's a very legitimate question, you know, because sometimes from unsuccessful cases, we learn more than from the successful stories. So this is something, you know, to maybe explore for the future.
Maybe from this side.
I don't want to jump into it too soon. This is really interesting, and I think I mean, you're studying a tiny sample of a massive phenomenon, and I think it's a really important reflection and thinking about how did you research on this type of phenomenon. So I think you set a great kind of introduction to how we might approach these questions. So I wonder if you think, based on this research and on other work that you work on, we've talked so much about trust and building trust through these social media, internet mediated things. Do you think that this process creates the possibility of a trust that will translate after this phenomenon is no longer necessary? And what might that look like?
Very, very good question. Thank you.
Will it last? Yes, basically.
Would it? Yeah, I don't know. I don't know. And you know, I was preparing for the presentation and reflecting upon, you know, we collected data in 2022, 2023. The context of 2024 and 2025 is different, totally different from what we witnessed even 2 years ago. So the context is changing. But if I talk to the, you know, not a more specific auditory with, you know, scholars, I would include all the research questions we had, and I could reflect a little bit more. But just to say, this is a unique case that gives us unique aspects of understanding how the trust, at least for short term, can be built. And that's enough in that particular situation when you need those donations to survive and the way how it was done. So in that way, we still can transfer those results to some other recent conflicts. So there is much to learn for other, war contexts and how their charities could also bring, this dialogue and engagement on social media. And coming back to your long-term aspects, that's very interesting, but we have to wait and see how it goes. I think those institutions like Come Back Alive, they have that strong, they work differently, not like Pritula. And here with Pritula, I think it depends on his own popularity, because the whole image of the fund is built on his character, on his, charisma, while Come Back Alive also has charismatic leadership, but not to the same extent, and they do things differently. So yeah, we need to wait and see, and then we can draw some conclusions. But it's a good question for the future research.
Thank you for the fascinating presentation. It's incredible insight on the general charity patterns. I was really fascinated by the fantastic visualizations that you had throughout the presentation. I think it was an incredible distillation of your research findings. So I was curious, what was your process for pulling out what info is actually pertinent to what you're studying, and how you were able to distill this, an entire Instagram page, an entire pattern of dialogue between the donors, and the charities themselves. How did you figure out what actually was necessary and useful to make sense of what you had in front of you?
Thank you very much. It's very pleasant to hear that. And, I'm a very visual person, and my co-author, Valeria, my former PhD student, she's also very visual. And when we start doing anything, we all the time draw. So we had two different spreadsheets, one in Excel, one in Word. And when you are a trained researcher, then you are trained in research methods and you know how to narrow your scope. Anyway, we have those files still with each single post and with each single comment analyzed. So in a way, one may say that it's really boring, but at the same time, when everything was unfolding and we were watching that, continuously during the whole year, and you live with that, you see that, and then, when you have to make a decision, then we had also the third co-author, the professor, she said, you can't look at each single campaign, we go for the three major ones. So that was basically the discussion and decision we made. And then we focused only on the three major ones where we could, analyze most of comments and see how the dialogue unfolded. Because, for example, at the beginning, there were a few people asking questions, and then there were thousands of people asking the same questions that were reflected in the videos by Pritula, for example. And then the new questions arrived that were very similar. And then we were able to trace, like different groups of those questions that were formulated differently, but were asking specifically the same thing. And this is how we actually proceeded. But it was, a lot of work, just, manually follow each single thing. But as we were actively engaged into that, we were also expecting something. And then, bump, video comes, on accountability of the charity fund. And we are like, this is exactly what we were asking about. And it was coming, like naturally. It was very interesting to see how it unfolded.
One from online audience then, if you're not ready. Barbara, is there a role for small nonprofits abroad to raise funds for Ukraine, and how can they supplement gaps of big charities and the Ukrainian government?
Oh yeah, you saw there was one slide with trust to volunteers, and they basically, most of those volunteers, they have very small charities, and the trust to those charities from person to person is actually much higher to the bigger ones. So there is a room for that, and absolutely, yeah.
Yeah, okay, so I sort of like have question, have comment. Thank you so much, it was very interesting. And so like general question is like, where you thinking of going further with this research? Is there like are you planning on developing into something bigger, do some comparative studies? Because I thought that it's very also interesting to see how like institutions are answering to this accountability need in a certain way. Because I think like recently, Monobank implemented a new thing requiring this like small private fundraisers to some documentation if they want to start their small fundraisers. I'm not sure even if there's like some limitation of the amount of money you want to like raise, but and I assume it's changed quite a lot since you started this research.
Yeah. No, Ukrainian context is amazing right now, and I'm working on 8 different papers at the moment, and they all are on different topics, not related to the charity, but related to the war. So yes, there are plans to make more comparison, and there are other, organizations that are so different, like this established United 24, and then we have Come Back Alive and Pritula, and there are many others. So the potential for research and also doing the ethnography is amazing. I mean, any of the scholars can start doing that, because actually you don't need the access, because you can study the secondary data in a way, and that's enough to construct the picture. So there are a lot of plans, but for now I don't do, some active research specifically dedicated to this at the moment. But of course, for the future, I'm sure I will return and do something more as a follow-up. And you give me a lot of insights and input and interesting research questions that I can work on. Yeah.
Oh yeah, hi, my name is Bruce, and I only listen small part, but I saw that on social media. So my question is, what do you feel is the hardest thing when you try to get donation in Asia market? Also, how you compare to the main social media in Asia to just like Line or WeChat or Chinese version TikTok compared to YouTube or Instagram?
Oh, very difficult question. I know nothing about Asian markets besides those things written in some papers. But anyway, I know about TikTok, and it's taking over. And I looked at the statistics today, and I think people spend more time on TikTok than they used to spend on Instagram, Facebook, etc. altogether. So it's gaining more popularity, and I'm sure it will be used in some ways, but really difficult to claim something because I didn't do research myself. So that's, difficult, but I think Instagram still serves its purpose for this kind of donations, like charity fund of Sergei Pritula. They still collect something there, and yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you for your romantic lecture. I have one specific question. From what sources did you get information about Ukrainians who donate? This 87%.
Yeah, thank you. There are many different charities, and one of those I even inserted the link in my presentation. They are called Zagori Foundation, and they do a lot of research on non-profit organizations in Ukraine. They do there is a lot of information on the charitable activities, so it's more hot than any time before. So you can access that information very easily. You can start from Zagori, and then they give links to many other different organizations.
For donations that come from outside of Ukraine's geographical territory, from both Ukrainians abroad and actual foreigners, are there any kind of patterns in terms of differences between various regions of the world? Like, for instance, are countries that are closer to Ukraine donating more, or how does the United States compare to Europe, for example?
It's very proportional to the diaspora living in there. So I think it's logical where we have most of Ukrainians living abroad from those parts of the world, most donations come. Because, especially when we look at these crowd-based donations, amount of money doesn't vary that much. I mean, people still donate some average, depending, of course, on the context, on their income. So where you have more Ukrainians from those parts of the world, more money come to Ukraine. So that's, I didn't really look. I think it's possible to check, But I think we can just look at the numbers of Ukrainians living abroad, and then we will have more or less, yeah, picture of what the donations are coming from them.
Time for some more questions? Here.
I have a very tiny question. In the research that you have done with the Charity Foundation, now just brought me to the idea of international, either Ukraine-based or the foundation or like charity organization that were founded by Ukrainians, like in the United States, like Razom or Nova Ukraine or other things. Is there anywhere like a general database or that kind of either compares them or summarize them collectively? All like I know it would be hard to say like all of them, but like the major players and how their spending goes like to humanitarian, military, or any other, just like somewhere together you can track like how different political situations in countries like United States recently, how that affects them getting like more or less funds from diaspora, like in United States or Canada or like United Kingdom.
You know, I was very concerned when we first got the signs that who will be the president, and then dismantling of US aid, et cetera, et cetera. So I know a lot of projects, they were cut down, shut down. There are so many people who worked in Ukraine and they are not able to do so. So of course, the geopolitical situation impacts, but at the same time, I was amazed. And actually, I was attending a charity event where those organizations that depend on, again, crowd-based donations, on private donations, not the governmental funds, they still operate. They still do, they still deliver, and they still have this cooperation. I was amazed. I was really happy to see that because I thought, I was really feared that they will stop. But at least at that presentation, I got the sense that no, we're not going to stop. We have those ties, we have to do that. And it was about rehabilitation, it was about psychological and also physical, treatment of veterans, etc. So from organization to organization, from person to person, everything continues. And I hope it will stay there where it is. And we
have one more question for Wahid, please.
Thank you. Thank you. Thanks a lot. It's for a historian, this is a really interesting phenomenon, given that really charity and donation, historically speaking, in Ukraine was not particularly developed. And please correct me, my understanding is that the current legislation still doesn't allow people who donate to have any sort of the tax deductions, right? So if this is correct, whether there is any discussion in terms of introducing a new law or changing the existing law. I heard that corruption is basically a big concern, but if you could say a few words about what is the situation with the tax deductions
yeah, I know.
for those who donate?
Yeah, very good question. And that's actually something we have to sit down and look more at. But at the moment, yes, the legislation is under, development, and there is the same procedures, for example, in the United States, when you get the tax deduction and when you donate. These schemes, they are available only for some big companies like maybe Rinat Akhmetov and this kind of, big companies. Why they started doing their charities, because there are some mechanisms in place, but at the individual level, it's still kind of difficult, and we are still approaching that stage when we will have it more formalized. And absolutely, it's on the agenda, but Ukraine deals with so many issues that they don't really come. So these kind of projects, they are underway, but not finalized.
So I want to thank our guest, Professor Olga Yarmolenko, for such a wonderful lecture.
Thank you so much.
And on Zoom, and I invite everybody next Wednesday, the same place, same time. Come here for lecture by Mykola Repchuk. It's titled "When Soft Power Turns Hard: Cancel Culture Controversy During the Russian-Ukrainian War." And for our UC students, please come tomorrow, Thursday, the library for the event with Dr. Lina Dibrova. So you won't be disappointed, please. Thank you.
Thank you very much for your questions.